Namaste everyone, and welcome to this edition of Indic Talks. My profound thanks to CIS and the Indus University and Ms. Basuji for organizing this event. And we are all gathered on an auspicious occasion when we are looking forward to the Pran Pratishtha ceremony at Ayodhya. And it's also an auspicious period where the Dakshinayana is coming to an end and Uttarayana is about to begin. So my best wishes to all of you on this new auspicious period. So let's get into the talk. So since Basuji already introduced me, I won't get into a lot of details, but this is my book that got published just last week. And whatever I'm going to present is a summarized version of a couple of chapters from this book. And it has been my good fortune to be associated with Rām Katha traditions for nearly 14 years. All right, so with that intro, let's get into the topic of today's talk. And before we get into the nuances of the Tamil sources, there is this big question in everyone's mind. Why should we study Tamil sources on Rām Katha tradition? And what are we going to gain and so on? Having spent several years and having gathered all the references, Tamil references on Rām Katha, one thing that's quite astonishing is that these traditions are nearly 2,300 years old. In fact, these references start very close to the period of Maharishi Valmiki himself. It goes back a couple of centuries before a common era, and it continues. And it's a living, thriving tradition in Tamil Nadu even today. When you visit Rama temples, you see festivals being conducted to celebrate Sita's marriage with Rama and so on. So it's a living, thriving tradition for over 2,300 years. And the continuity is quite mind-boggling. I'll show you all the historic references. That's the first point. The second thing is, over this long historic period and timeline, we see that the story of Rama has inspired so many Tamil saints, kings and poets and artisans and poet laureates and performing artists. Countless number of people have been inspired, and they have expressed their inspiration in many artistic and poetic creations. Just to name a few, I am sure all of you are well aware of Saint Sri Ramanujacharya, who is the propounder of Visishta Dvaita philosophy. And his very name, Rama Anuja, means one who is dear to Rama. And then you have Saint Tyagaraja, who is one of the doyens of Carnatic music, classical Carnatic music. And he sang so many kirtanas in praise of Rama. You have Guru Sri Raghavendra Swami, who hailed from Tamil Nadu and who belonged to the Kumbakonam Mutt originally, who is from the Madhva tradition. And he was an ardent devotee of Rama. These are some of the well-known figures, but there are numerous other personalities, artisans, poets, and musicians who have expressed their Ram Bhakti and the spirit of Rama over this long period. And it's also noteworthy that the pinnacle of Tamil literature, called the Ramavataram by Kambar, is actually a Rām Katha rendition in Tamil. imagine a region with rich literary traditions, quoting Rām Katha rendering as its best creation. So that doesn't happen by chance. There should be some social environment, and there should be a big tapasya of the society for such a creation to happen. It doesn't happen by chance. And once we study these references, we find that they are not only complementing the larger narrative, the larger Bharatiya traditions, but they enrich with newer information, novel perspectives, and diverse traditions, which helps us to understand the evolution and expansion of Rām Katha traditions. And no wonder the Tamil inscriptions actually provide the earliest epigraphic evidence to the existence of independent Rama temples in the whole of India. Remember that this became a very big contention during the Ram Janmabhoomi case regarding the worship and the divinity of Rama and when it was recognized by society. I have given another talk dedicated to this subject, but we will briefly touch upon this even today as we proceed. And not only Rama worship, very interestingly, the Tamil inscriptions also offer insights on Hanuman worship. In fact, the earliest epigraphic record that suggests the inclusion of Hanuman within the Ram Parivar is actually a Tamil inscription. We will also touch upon that if time permits. So obviously, you see a lot of nuances, a lot of new insights, a lot of new perspectives emerging. And that is why a study of Tamil sources become important. And we'll get a glimpse of what this all is today. And before we go further, I wanted to clarify some of the terminologies. You will notice that I am continuously using the term Rām Katha and not Ramayana, because Ramayana refers to a very specific literary version of Maharishi Valmiki. Whereas what we are going to talk today is around a generic storyline, which is not very specific version, and it encompasses all kinds of regional variations and so on. And coming to the term Rām Katha tradition, this is a very broad umbrella term in the context of this talk. We are including all kinds of artistic expressions, right from oral narratives to literatures and epigraphic records, sculptures, even Rama worship, right? The Rama worship, Rama temples, everything can be included in this broad term. And the period under study starts a couple of centuries before Common Era, and it goes until 13th century. Normally, you see a lot of information being exchanged in the media about the Rām Katha traditions after this period. You start hearing about what happened in 15th century and 14th century and so on, but you don't hear much about what happened in the first millennia. So I thought it will be good to actually cover that area, that time frame, and that happens to be my focus of research as well, because this is the formative period. This is, by studying this, we understand how these traditions evolved over time and how the divinity of Rama was recognized and so on and so forth. So it's a very important formative period in the broader Bharatiya and Rām Katha narrative. You see the sculpture I have highlighted is from 10th century, and here is Ram instructing Lakshman, and Lakshman is actually directing the Vanaras, the monkeys, to construct the Ram Setu, and this is one of the earliest sculptural evidence that shows that the building of Ram Setu. And the person in the middle is a curious one. He's actually raising his hand and showing a Vismaya Mudra. He's most likely a Sutradhari of Sanskrit dramas. We don't have time to cover the sculptures so much today, but that's just a taste of what Tamil Rām Katha sculptures have to offer. So before we get into the Tamil traditions, I thought it will be good to have a broader perspective and a timeline view of how these traditions evolved over time across Bharat. So we start with the Bardic traditions or the oral traditions, which were the earliest to adopt Rām Katha. We see two sets of people practicing this. One are the Sutas and the Makathas. In Tamil, they were called Panars. And these are performing artisans who went to all parts of India, propagating many different stories and family narratives and so on. And most likely, Rām Katha was one of their popular themes. And then you have the second class, which is from the ritualistic tradition. We have Brahmin priests rendering these long akyanas during major yajnas. There is a Satapatha Brahmana reference that talks about people alternating and they sing these long akyanas with their lute or veena. Throughout the night, throughout the day, it continued for several days. So you can imagine how rich this tradition was. And after a certain period, the Bardic tradition continues, but it loses its shine a little bit because literatures and other traditions pick up. But these artisans continue to exist in pockets. And at around 7th century, we get the first definitive evidence of what is called Vriddhi tradition. Probably it started a couple of centuries earlier. So what this is systematic discourses on the Itihas, such as the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. Donations were given to expound Rām Katha in temples. We will see some epigraphic references and so on. But the earliest record that indicates such a trend is a 7th century record. And sometimes they are also known as Bharata Vritris, indicating it was Mahabharata or it was given for Mahabharata, but eventually they also included Rām Katha and other Puranas and so on. And you see a very recent picture of a bardic of a person who is from West Bengal, who comes from this bardic tradition. And it's quite astonishing that this person is actually playing a string instrument as well as handling a percussion instrument at the same time, and he's also singing. So he is actually doing the work of 3 different artisans at the same time, which gives you a taste of the skill and the professionalism of these bards. And once you actually witness such an event, they are so well skilled in their art that you don't lose your attention. They can actually hold on to your attention for a very long time. Unfortunately, this tradition has died out in many parts of India, but it survives in very small pockets. Then we go to the literary tradition, and this we all know very well. A few centuries before Common Era, we have Maharishi Valmiki rendering the Ramayana. And Valmiki drew many of his inspirations from these bardic tales. And even Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa, who wrote the Mahabharata, the Jaya, which is the original version of Mahabharata, even he drew inspirations. There are indirect references that help us to reach that conclusion. Then we have the Jatakas, which represent the Buddhist view of Rām Katha. And many people don't realize that the Jatakas we have today are not the original Pali versions. We lost those original tales. What we do have is translations that happened in Sinhalese and Chinese in centuries after the Common Era, and then they were translated back to Pali. But they still retain some of the original characteristics of the story, so they are significantly important. And another thing you find is many of these Buddhist stories are more bothered about the banishment episode. Dasaratha Kadanam, Dasaratha Jataka, Anamaka Jataka, and many different stories. They are just focusing about the first part of the story. And later on, I'm going to show you that the Tamil references before Common Era are talking about the second part of the story, which is the abduction and the war. They are more bothered about the second part. And it kind of tells us that probably in the Bardic tradition, they were probably two different tales which were nicely woven together by sage Valmiki, and that gives room to the travel from north all the way to deep south and so on. And then in the centuries following Common Era, we have the Bhaumacharyam of Vimalasuri. And then we have a whole slew of literatures. There are too many literatures. I haven't represented all of them. We have the Pratima Nadaka. We have Raghuvamsa by Mahakavi Kalidas, Setubandha of Pravarasena, a Vakataka king, and then so on and so forth. There are a lot of literatures. So this literary tradition continues all the way. And what you see here is a critical edition of Valmiki Ramayana by Vadodara, the scholars of Vadodara University. This was also a result of a big tapasya. It's a wonderful work that involved many years of hard work by Professor Bhatt and Professor U.P. Shah. Then we have the sculptural tradition. We see some isolated occurrences of Rām Katha theme occurring in Sunga terracotta images, but we don't see a continuity there. Continuity starts roughly around 4th or 5th century, and we have a whole bunch of Gupta period temples portraying Rām Katha theme along the temple walls. Many of them were terracotta panels. We have those from Nacharkeda and Betargon and Apsad and so many other places around this period. You see the cluster of temples happening within a very small 2 to 3 centuries of Gupta hegemony. We also have the stone temple at Deoghar, and what you see here is the Ahalya Udaran episode from Deoghar. The Deoghar temple is important from a different perspective because it's quoted as a Dasavatar temple. So here is a definitive evidence to Ram being recognized as an avatar of Vishnu, and many themes of Rām Katha appearing alongside other avatara such as the Krishna avatara. And after 6th century, you don't see significant sculptural activity north of Indus, but the south picks up. You see the Chalukyan temples and so on. I have purposely avoided the Tamil references because I'm going to show you a different slide which exclusively portrays the picture from the ancient Tamil regions. All right. So you see there is some synergy in this period, right? You see a lot of literatures emerging in the Gupta period, and you also see a very busy temple building activity and sculptural activity. In fact, I have spread out these bullets a little bit because I didn't find space, but actually they are clustered within a few centuries. And finally, we have the epigraphic tradition. And these can be categorized into many groupings. The first category is inscriptions showing influence of Valmiki Ramayana. For example, the Girnar inscription and the Nasik Satavahana inscription and so on. Scholars have noticed influence of Adi Kavi, none other than Maharishi Valmiki, in these inscriptions. And then we have the Girnar inscription of Samudragupta, Skandagupta, I think, quoting a sloka from Valmiki Ramayana itself. So you see the poets writing these prasastis and the inscription records being influenced by Ramayana as a literature. We also have comparisons between the royalty and the Rama. Kings being compared to Rama's valor and prowess and so on. And this also starts happening from 2nd century onwards. If I remember right, the earliest one is the Satavahana Vasishta Putra Pulumave's inscription. And we have a number of references. It continues all the way. The third category is kings being well versed in these itihas. And the earliest such record comes from Chalukya, the Nerur copperplate inscriptions of Mangalesa, which talks about his father, Pulikesin I, being well versed in these itihasas. Because itihasa, an education of itihasa was considered essential for implementing the Rajadharma and the Nidhi Paripalana in those states. And we have a very interesting inscription from Vietnam, Tracu, which actually talks about a king, a Champa king there, constructing a temple for sage Valmiki. It's a very interesting Sanskrit inscription, and it shows the influence of Rām Katha as well as Valmiki Ramayana across India. It's only the pedestal has survived, the temple hasn't survived fully, but you can see the pedestal and the inscription even today. And we come to the most important part of these epigraphic records, which are all about the Rama temples, Rama cult and Rama worship. And the earliest epigraphic record that suggests or attests to the divinity of Rama is the Pune and Ridhapur copper plates of Queen Prabhavati Gupta. She hailed from the Gupta family and got married to the Vakataka kings. And these two copper plates, in these two copper plates, the queen is doing her offerings after praising the Lord of Ramagiri. And through the references from Kalidasa's Meghaduta, we know that this Ramgiri is nothing but present-day Ramtek hill. And we are also now able to say with certainty that she is actually doing these offerings for the Ramapada that was located there. Raghupadi Pada is the actual term used by Kalidasa. And there was also a Tirtha or a tank, temple tank called Janaki Tirtha or something. So you see this mountain being associated with Rām Katha, probably in centuries before 5th, right? That's why the queen is actually hailing the Lord of Ramagiri. Ramagiri Swami Padamulat is the actual term from Pune copper plates. But after that reference, we don't find any epigraphic record for nearly 6 centuries talking about Ram temples or anything of that sort. We don't find any records. And the very next record actually happens sometime around mid-12th century. The Rajim stone inscription and the Reva stone inscription of the Kalachuri kings, talking about construction of Rama temples. And we also have the Vishnu Hari inscription of Ayodhya, which became a very important record in the Honorable Court for establishing the presence of temple before 15th century. So there is a big gap that hasn't been accounted for. And there is also this period even in sculptures, right? The South India picks up to some extent, but in the North we don't see a lot of sculptural activity. So there is this gap that that needs to be kept in mind. Later on, next I will show you the Tamil references, and you see that the sculptural, epigraphic, and literatures from South and Tamil region beautifully fills up this gap. So it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle being filled. So let's go to the Tamil sources along the same timeline. You see how busy this activity is. All these are references to independent temples of Rama. So let's from the start with the oral traditions. It's quite astonishing that Rām Katha has traveled all over India, all over ancient India, even before the period of Valmiki. And very interestingly, there are several references in Tamil that actually prove that the bardic traditions actually traveled across Bharat, which is very interesting. And the Vriddhi tradition I spoke about earlier is actually from Tamil Nadu. That earliest record that speaks about systematic propagation of Itihas is actually from Tamil Nadu, which is again a very noteworthy point. We have literary traditions starting alongside the period of Valmiki, very close. We are talking about almost 3rd century BC and so on. And these references continue. In my book, I have studied all these references. I'll just give you a glimpse of some of those today, but these are too many. You have the Sangam Literatures. You have multiple references from the late Sangam and the post-Sangam Tamil books, Tamil literatures. We will discuss today about Rām Katha references in Kāvya literature and so on and so forth. The list is endless. And all of this culminating to the grand epic or the magnum opus called the Ramavataram of Kambar. In all probability, this poet lived during 9th century and not in 13th century as many people believe. At least that is the conclusion I'm coming to after researching all these references. And this grand epic is nothing short of the rendition from sage Valmiki. It's not a replica. It has a lot of regional traditions and so on. And then we have sculptural references that begin to appear roughly around 8th century, but they are much more continuous and much more systematic from 9th and 10th centuries. We have narrative Rām Katha reliefs that begin to appear in several Saivite temples. In fact, my journey into this research topic actually began with these 4 temples. That was my Ph.D. originally. And then it expanded into all these other areas. They are very fascinating for what they offer. I showed you one of the sculptures earlier, wherein you see between Rama and Lakshmana, who are 2 important characters, there is a Sutradhari standing and explaining the greatness of that event, which indicates the influence of dramas in those sculptures and so on. All right. So that is the sculptural tradition. And then we have these epigraphic records, which are numerous. In fact, I have identified nearly 36 inscriptions that talk about Rama temples in Tamil Nadu during this period between 9th and 13th centuries. Exactly the time period where the North Indian references are very rare. You have numerous references coming out of South India. And there is a very interesting phenomenon that also comes to light, which is the association of the Tamil Rama temples with the Rama temple, the then Rama temple that was located at Ayodhya. And that is how the topic of today's talk was derived. It's not something I invented. The Tamil inscriptions call the deity in these temples as Ayōdhipperumāḻ, or the Lord of Ayodhya. And that became the title of my book as well. We'll see little more details about all this in subsequent slides. So you see, you compare these two, you get a very clear picture of how Tamil traditions and Bharatiya traditions complement each other. When the period of low activity is happening in North India, you see the South picking up and so on. All right, with that prelude, let's get into some of these references and look at what they have to offer. So we begin with the Sangam period. And many of you might know that Sangam actually represents a group of scholars. The word Sangam is actually a literal translation of the Buddhist Sangha or something like that, which represents a gathering. So these Tamil scholars gathered at different points of time. We come to know of at least 3 such Sangams, and they actually evaluated the works of merit, and they actually compiled into books with the context, with the poet name, as well as the situation in which these poems were written and so on. So you not only get the poem, but you also get the context in which that poem is written and so on, which is very rare. In later periods, you don't get this contextual information, which attests to the existence of these Sangam organizations. And we have 3 books, the Ettu Thogai or the eight anthologies and so on. And then there is Pattu Pattu or 10 idols. And there are a whole bunch of later texts called the 18 later texts or Padinen Keelkanakku. And all of them contain references to Rām Katha. We'll just see a couple of them today. But more importantly, I wanted to highlight the trends, the general trends that you see in all these references. The very first aspect that you notice in all these references is that poets are straight away quoting events and characters without any introduction. They don't take any effort to introduce either the character or the event. They straight away quote one of the events as what is known as upamana or an example. So they talk about something, and as an example, they are actually quoting a Rām Katha reference. So what this really means is these poets are actually talking to a society which is already aware of Rām Katha. They are not introducing Rām Katha, which again attests to the fact that through Bardic traditions, people from the Tamil land, ancient Tamil land, were already aware of the key characters and key events of Rām Katha. And the second aspect that you see is some geographies being specific places being associated with Rām Katha. In the classic case in point is this poem that I have quoted, and it actually gives an example of a lovers meeting, and then it's being compared to the sample event that is being quoted here is the Mantralosana or the wartime war council of Rama meeting at Dhanushkodi. Here it's referred to as Thun Mudugodi. And this location is being recognized as the port of Pandyas. Venver Kauriyar Thun Mudugodi. Gauriyar means Pandyas. And Thun Mudugodi is the Dhanushkodi. It's available even today, very near Rameshwaram. And this poet by name Kaduvan Mallanar, what he says is there was a war council, and birds were making a lot of noise. And just by raising a single hand, Rama was able to shut down all those birds, and they all listened to him, and they became totally silent. This whole war council meeting is happening below a big banyan tree. And what is interesting is this particular war council meeting doesn't happen in the Ramayana of Valmiki. So which means this probably represent an indigenous tale or an indigenous version of Rām Katha. So in fact, in all these references, we don't find any explicit reference to Maharishi Valmiki, even though one of the Sangam poets actually was named after Valmiki. His name is Valmīkanād, and there is a poem which he rendered. So a lot of these are local traditions, and that again suggests that these traditions should have existed in prior centuries, and that's why you see this local geographies being associated with Rām Katha. In terms of characters and their treatments, you continuously see Rama being recognized as a war hero. He is being referred to as well-bore Raman, one who cannot be conquered, and so on in war. His divinity is not mentioned. You don't find any explicit reference, even though some later Sangam references allude to some of his divine nature. And a very interesting aspect of these references is that they are talking about an indigenous feat of Rama, wherein he is repeatedly mentioned as a hero who destroyed the fortress, a particular fortification called So. In Tamil, this is being referred to as So Aran. And there are multiple references about this feat, and it almost seems like Ram conquered Lanka only by destroying this fortress, this particular fortification. It's a very specific type of fortification. We don't know much about what this is, because in the post-Sangam and late Sangam period literatures, this reference completely dies out. So it's a very early phenomenon, and probably this was a kind of fortress that existed in those ages, and that came to be associated with Rām Katha, which is quite interesting. Another aspect of these references is their picturization and treatment of Ravan. You see him being portrayed as a very powerful Arakkan or Asura, and the name Ravan doesn't appear anywhere. He's always being referred to as Valittagai Arakkan and Arakkar Koman and so on and so forth. While Rama's name is mentioned, you see here on the top, you don't see the name of Ravana being mentioned. Why is it important? It is important from an anthropological perspective, because in ancient societies, there was no proper name for many individuals. And this continued for many centuries. In fact, during the last century, when the very first election was conducted in India, this became a big problem. And another noteworthy feature is that Bhakti literatures that start from 7th century, they actually hail Lord Shiva as the one who gave this name Ravan to this Asura. Avanukor namam indu is the exact quotation. So you see the story appearing in Uttara Ramayana as well, which was not originally the part of Maharshi Valmiki's rendering, but it was a later addition. But this episode where Lord Shiva names Ravana after this his attempt to lift Mount Kailash and so on, it's Shiva who gives the name Ravan to this Asura, and you see some very interesting connections happening there. And this concept of Ravana Anugraha, wherein Ravana attempts to lift Mount Kailash and Shiva crushing him with his feet, appears as a very popular theme in later temple sculptures. You see one such sculpture from Kanchipuram, but you have many more occurring all over Tamil Nadu in 7th, 8th and 9th centuries roughly. So the idea of this Ravana Anugraha goes all the way back to Sangam literatures. So it's a very old construct that continued to inspire poets and artisans. And Sita's abduction is mentioned. As I quoted earlier, almost all Sangam literatures are more bothered about the abduction and the war council and the conquest of Lanka and so on. They just don't talk about Ayodhya or the banishment or anything of that sort. They are just bothered about the second half of the story and the Vanaras and so on. And there is a very interesting reference to Ahalya's act and her curse in Paripadal. And what is noteworthy is that there is no reference to Rama. So there is this Ahalya, the poet refers to Ahalya and the fact that she was cursed into a stone and so on. But he doesn't mention about Rama relieving her of her curse. So probably this is an older version of the story. And the stone construct that you encounter in Paripadal is very much a South Indian tradition. You don't see this in the northern recensions of Valmiki Ramayana. You find it only in southern recensions of Valmiki Ramayana, which is again a proof that this was more South Indian in its origins. And again, Kambar quotes only this episode. You have a sculpture from Pullamangai showing Ahalya relieved of his curse from being a stone. From then, we come to the next phase of development, which happened during the sometime around 4th, 5th, and roughly 6th centuries. You have the Kāvya Literatures emerging in Tamil. We had 5 Kāvyas in those days, out of which 3 have survived in their full version. And 2 of them contain significant references to Rām Katha. These are the earliest ones, the Silappadigaram, or the story of an anklet, by poet Elango Vadigal, and the Mani Mekalai of Seethalai Chatanar. Both of them contain several references. And one of the very significant developments that happens in Kāvya literature is the repeated recognition of Rama as an avatar of Vishnu. This was not noticed earlier in Sangam Literatures. Only in Kāvya Literatures we begin to get these references. And both Kāvyas provide multiple references on Rama's divinity. And Silappadigaram is also one of the earliest Tamil literatures to list all the avatars of Vishnu. We don't get all the 10 avatars, but we get quite a few. And we see Rama being placed and recognized as one of these avatars. And the picture that I'm showing here is called the Adi Varaha cave temple. It's a 8th century cave temple built by the Pallava kings. And this contains one of the earliest epigraphic records of all the 10 avatars of Vishnu. And interestingly, Buddha is also listed as an avatar here. And so this is the earliest epigraphic record, and the earliest literary record from Tamil is from Silappadigaram. And another aspect of this treatment of Kāvyas is that the human qualities of Rama are not completely abandoned. In Silappadigaram, for example, we find a reference as Kadunduyar Uranra Kādalan. He is missing Sita so much, and that is being alluded to. You don't find these kind of references in later literatures, the Bhakti literatures, because at that point of time, Rama is already recognized as a god. So his human-like qualities are completely abandoned in later periods. But in Kāvyas, you see this emergence. You see Ram being recognized as an avatar on one side, but his human qualities are also being referred to in few occasions, which is another noteworthy point. And the Kāvyas also provide the earliest reference to Ayodhya, and this happens in a very interesting way. The hero is actually going out of his native city, which is the Puhar, and the poet is actually giving comparison. Just like Rama left Ayodhya, this hero has left Puhar, and so on. So instead of giving any other example of any local tradition or local places, the poet is straight away referring to Rama and Ayodhya, which means the story and Rama departing from Ayodhya had been well established construct by that period. And this is also the earliest occurrence of the banishment story. We saw earlier that the Sangam literatures didn't speak about the banishment episode at all, but now we start finding references to the banishment and so on. And after this period, around 4th, 5th, you find continuous literary and also epigraphic references to Ayodhya. And in Kāvya Literatures, we come across a very astonishing story about these two birds called Sampati and Jadayu. We all know that the Jadayu's association with Rām Katha and how he fought bravely with Rama and so on. And that all happens, when Ravana is trying to abduct Sita, right? The Tamil Kāvya references provide a very curious reference. Manimekalai says there was a garden on the outskirts of this place, a very popular port city called Puhar or Kaviripattanam. And it was called Sampati Vana. It was called by the name of this bird. The Sampati Vana was located on the outskirts of the city. And that's the reference these Kāvya literatures provide. And later on, 1 or 2 centuries later, we find even more references about these two birds and their association with the Tamil region. And these evidences come from the Bhakti literatures. Saint Thiruñāna Sambandar, who is a Saivite saint, and he sings in praise of these birds, and he clearly says that these birds flew all the way to this Saivite temple. In olden days, this was called Pullirukkum Velur. Today, if you search Google Maps, you will find this location as Vaithiswaran Koil. And he actually gives the distance as 1 yojana. So the birds flew every day 1 yojana distance, and they got flowers for the Archana of the Lord. And in many different stanzas, Saint Sambandar sings in praise of Jatayu and his devotion to Lord Shiva and so on. And the very name of this location, the old name, Pul Irukkum Velur, Pul means birds. So the very name of the locality is associated with birds. Now you might wonder why I'm giving so much importance to this. Because these references do not occur in Valmiki Ramayana at all. In fact, you don't find any reference about the nativity of these birds, where they hailed from, what they were doing, and so on. The story of Sampati and Jadayu occurs later on in Sundaraganda. As you know very well, it is Sampati who actually tells the Vanara crew about the abduction of Sita and that she is probably in a jail in Lanka and so on. And during the course of that encounter, Sampati narrates the story of him and his brother and how he actually, both of them tried to fly all the way to touch the sun god. And it was too hot, and they lost their wings and so on. And Sampati tries to protect his brother, and that's how he loses all his wings and so on. You might wonder why they are trying to go and touch the sun. Nobody does that, right? Because they were actually children of Surya, God Surya. That's why they are trying to go and enjoy the proximity of their father. And we don't find any reference to their nativity or where they hail from and so on. Whereas the Tamil references are actually saying these two birds actually hail from this very locality, and that they were very ardent Saivite devotees and so on. So it's quite possible that some of these legends date back to prior periods. It cannot be that a garden gets created in the name of a bird all of a sudden in 5th century. These legends probably go back several centuries earlier, And this again is an example of traditions traveling from north to south and south to north and so on. And there are additional references to the Rama, Ravana war and so on. In the interest of time, I will just quickly go through some of these. We find additional references to Kanyakumari. Interestingly, the Kavyas actually associate Kanyakumari with Ram Setu. Earlier, we saw Dhanushkodi being associated with the War Council meeting, but here we find Kurangugal Seida Kumariyam Perundurai, which is the Kanyakumari's association with Ram Setu and so on. So multiple localities came to be associated with Rām Katha. Then we have the Bhakti devotional literatures, 4,000 sacred hymns from the Vaishnavite Alvars, and the 12 books, the 12 sacred books of the Saivite tradition, both of which contain numerous references to Lord Ram and Rām Katha events. Obviously, because of the Vaishnavite association, you find a lot more references in the Nalayira Divya Prabandham rather than Saivite books, but both of them contain very significant and very important quotations. Unfortunately, I am not able to go through many of these references in detail, but I have analyzed all of them in my book, and hopefully I can publish an English paper at a later point of time. We are talking about no less than 100 to 200 references just in Nalayiram alone. So they are too many in number. And on the Saivite side, very interestingly, we have more references on Ravana rather than Rama, because in Tamil traditions recognize Ravana as a supreme Shiva Bhakta, and his attempt to lift Mount Kailash is repeatedly being hailed by saints Thiruñāna Sambandar and Thirunavukarasar and so on. And we see the picture of Sri Kulasekara, who was a Chera king and who was also a Vaishnavite Alvar, well known for his renditions on and references on Rām Katha. And we finally come to the epigraphic references. I spoke about the Vriddhi reference and donations, which are nothing but donations for systematic exposition of Bharata and Rām Katha and so on. We saw about comparisons. These comparisons happen in Tamil traditions as well. I am trying to compare the epigraphic records from the north with the Tamil epigraphic records side by side, so that you are actually able to see how there are these 36 inscriptions, not all of which are represented here, occurring in a period where there is a gap in the north. And as I mentioned earlier, they talk about independent temples of Rama consecrated between 9th and 13th centuries. And from these 36 inscriptions, we hear about roughly 21 independent temples. And we gather a lot of information about how these temples functioned, and we observe the conclusion we can come to is that they were fully functional Hindu Vaishnavite shrines with all the rituals, with all the modes of worship, even festivals, indicating that there was a Rama cult, a devotional Rama cult that was well established in this period. So we can't say that the Rama cult began only after 12th century. We have to take it all the way back to 9th century and probably beyond, because when temples of Rama emerge, it doesn't emerge all of a sudden. There should have been a lot of developments before for these temples to be constructed and consecrated. And finally, we come to the association between these Rama temples and the Ayodhya Rama temple. So what I observed was many of these temples, 9 out of 21 Rama temples in Tamil Nadu, are actually called Thiru Ayodhi. Very curious. The term Thiru literally represents Shri, which is a mark of respect. So Thiru and Ayodhi. And why is this strange? Because usually these temples were named after their locations or something like that. You don't find a temple being named with a locality that exists elsewhere in the north. As you all know, holy locations in ancient India were called as tirthas, and the temple proper were called kshetras. And in this case, you find a tirtha name, in this case Ayodhya, being adopted as the name of a kshetra. And this is very curious. You don't find these kind of combination occurring in any other Saivite or Vaishnavite temples of this period. We have thousands of inscriptions, and they always refer to the local locality and local names. They don't refer to the North Indian cities, holy cities, and so on. This occurs only in the case of Rama and Krishna, where the temples are being referred to as Thiru Ayodhya and Vadamadura and so on. So what does this mean? Why these temples were named after Ayodhya? There can only be one reason. They were meant to represent the Ayodhya and the Ram temple at Ayodhya for the local devotees. There is no other reason. Which means Ram temple existed sometime around 9th century for sure. That's why these local temples were named after that temple. And you can go and study all the epigraphic and archaeological remains that were uncovered by the ASI. You will find that there is only one Ram temple that repeatedly comes up from Ayodhya, and that is the older Ram Janmabhoomi temple. So it seems that the temple, as per ASI records, ASI excavation reports, the apsidal temple basement can be dated to 10th century. But here we find that even from the beginning of 10th century, these temples are being named after Ayodhya, which means probably there was a brick structure or something that existed earlier. We don't know much about that. But what is stunning is that the Ayodhya temple was being recognized all the way in the Tamil region, which is located deep down the peninsula, which actually speaks to about the respect and regard for not just the newer Ram temple, but even the older Ram temple almost 1,000 years ago. And the god is repeatedly referred to as Thiru Ayodhipperumāļ, Thiru Ayodhya Rāgavapperumāļ, and Thiru Ayodhya Chakravarti. You see this Ayodhya association continuously occurring. So the emphasis on this Ayodhya indicates that probably this is not one or two. We are talking about 9 temples across different regions of ancient Tamilakam. Probably there was a cult associated with Ayodhya Rama. And it's quite unlikely that this just happened in Tamil Nadu. This should have been a Bharatīya phenomenon. But unfortunately, we don't have much references coming out of other regions. But fortunately, these evidences are available at least from the Tamil country. So in conclusion, we see that the Ayodhya Ram temple has been a unifying force, not just today, but it has been the case for many, many centuries in the past. So in the spirit of that unifying force, let's pray for the welfare of all being in the name of Rama. Thank you very much for the time. Jai Shri Ram.